The doctor of the church religion I assume, the doctor of the church that I chose was Saint Jerome. Who is Saint Jerome? Saint Jerome was a Dalmatian, which is a modern-day Croatian. He's a biblical translator and a monastic leader. Born in Dalmatia, Stridon, his most famous work is in the Vulgate, which is a Latin translation of the Bible. He also wrote the Chronicon, a chronology that translates and expands on the book of the same name written by Eusebius. This is an addition to many theological writings. Saint Jerome's teachings has shaped the church in a way that is still relevant today. The life of Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome was born in 347 in Dalmatia, Stridon, and was a part of the Roman Empire at the time. Saint Jerome was born to a wealthy Christian parent at Stridon. His education began home, was continued in Rome when he was about 12. There he studied grammar and philosophy. He was baptized in 366 by Pope Liberius. At Traverses, he was profoundly attached to monotheism. In 374, he rested as a guest of the priest Vargas of the Anoi, and there have been composed of his earliest work, De Sapiis Percassa, which is the concerning 7 beatings. During a fatal illness, he had celebrated a dream. In that dream, in which he was dragged before a tribunal of the Lord, he was accused of a pagan follower of the Roman philosopher Marcus Tullius Cicero, which means the pagan follower means that he does not believe in certain religions. And so due to this, he promised to never read pagan literature in his life. Jerome tried to ignore the dream and its possible meanings, but for the years it prevented him from reading the classics of pleasure, and at the time it was a cause of a genuine spiritual crisis. One result of the dream was his first works, an allegorical commentary on the biblical book of Obadiah, which he later disowned 21 years later. In 375, Jerome tried but failed at life as hermit. During this time, however, he studied Hebrew and Greek and wrote manuscripts at the library he worked at. During his adult life, he's most famous for translating much of the Bible. For example, he translated 14 of the Origen's homily sermons on the Old Testament book into Latin. When he returned to Rome to work for Pope Damasus I, that is when he took his scholarly work on the Bible seriously. This is when he began translating the New Testament into Latin. He made a pilgrimage through Palestine and through the religious sites of Egypt. In 386, he settled in Bethlehem and lived there until the day that he passed away, which was in the year 420. The important works in translation done by Saint Jerome. In the 3rd and 4th century AD, Latin began to replace Greek as the common language of the Roman world and soon became the language of the liturgy. This is only possible due to the works that Saint Jerome did in his life. For example, translating the Bible into Latin. The timeline of this was the same time as when Saint Jerome translated the Bible into Latin. Not only did he translate, but he also helped revise biblical books such as Proverbs and the Book of Job. In fact, in the 1500s, it was declared that all masses would be done in Latin, and this decision stayed all the way until up to the 1960s, but even today, some masses are still held in Latin. Which all goes back to Saint Jerome's original translation of the Bible. Doctrines and teachings of Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome was more than just a translator. His writings held the ideas of the Catholic Church. Saint Jerome was an apologist, meaning that he studied the ideas of expanding and defending Christianity. Saint Jerome wrote Adversus Jovanium in 393, which literally translates to against Jovinian, as it was criticism of his works. In this, Saint Jerome defended the idea of clerical celibacy, which is basically like priests aren't be able to get married and stuff like that. So something, and that is still a rule today, to this day. One could argue, without this defense coming from a scholar like Saint Jerome, the rule of clerical celibacy, which is also about priests not getting married, would not exist today. Another relevant defense that Saint Jerome argued was the idea that Mother Mary was always a virgin. The perpetual virginity of Mary was a debated topic during this time. Due to his defense, this doctrine is still taught today as important Catholic doctrines. Doctrines and teachings of Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome was a very critical person, specifically towards what he believed to be enemies of the Church. In addition to Adversus Jovenium, he wrote the Adversus Helvetium and the Contra Legitium, which were all critical works against the arguments of what the people wrote. It's just he counted their arguments on what they wrote. For example, the Villigentius argued the idea of sacred relics, and Saint Jerome defended this idea against him. To this day, relics, personal items from saints and holy figures that are still treated with respect today. In conclusion, Saint Jerome earned the name of being a doctor of the Catholic Church, starting from his early life when he was studying philosophy to translating the Bible into Latin and developing many doctrines that are still used today. Without Saint Jerome, masses will not be in Latin, and some of the practice and teachings of the Church will definitely be different today. This is how he earned the name Doctor of the Catholic Church. And this is the Works Cited, and this is my presentation on Saint Jerome, Doctor of the Church.